Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The Matchroom boss Eddie Hearn, he's got to be having a laugh, right? Surely. He's saying that the mass public would prefer to see Dillian Whyte face Derek Chisora, to face Chisora over Luis Ortiz. Dear oh dear. Now that's a clanger if I ever heard one. And there's a few things that automatically spring to mind with that sort of statement, including the rhetoric. I think it's designed to be an out-and-out negotiating tactic to sort of strong-arm Chisora and also potentially Ortiz. But more on that later, because before I get to any analysis, I want to work through the statements from Hearn himself and also Derek Chisora. He's also popped his head above the parapet. So thanks to those who've sent me some links on here on YouTube or on Twitter. So I'll get to a couple of that. The first being a Sky Sports article with Eddie Hearn quoted as saying, "We want to make sure the December 22 card is confirmed early next week. Dillian Whyte will fight on that night at the O2 and we want to make the Chisora fight. Widely, that is the fight everyone wants to see. We do have the options of Brazil or Ortiz as well, but we'll see if a deal can be done in the next few days with Chisora, and if not, we'll move on." Derek Chisora, he's also quoted in that story as saying, "Yeah, we're going to try do the fight this week. We'll see what happens anyway, but we definitely want to make the fight for December 22 by the weekend and then everything announced. We haven't started talks, but I believe by the end of this weekend, or we'll have done it by Friday. I'm going to smash him. No one wants to see that." He's referring to an Ortiz fight. "So I don't know why he's talking about Luis Ortiz. I'm the money man." I would note, before I get to the next quotes, that Eddie Hearn, he was travelling up to Newcastle ahead of one of his shows, and he asked on Twitter, "Send me some questions and Ask Eddie session." And one of the questions what he got was, well, how likely is the Luis Ortiz fight getting made? And he said 50-50. So just bear that in mind. And then in Newcastle, he's spoken to a YouTube channel I'm not very familiar with called Sporting Icons, in which he asked, in respect of Chisora and Ortiz, who's the favourite to get the Whyte fight? Hearn's response, definitely Chisora. But the Ortiz fight could be made if the Chisora deal doesn't happen. The fight that I think we want, and certainly generally the mass public want, is Chisora. I know that from a hardcore perspective, people love the Ortiz fight as well, so our focus is on the Chisora fight, but we're running out of time. So if that fight's not made by the end of the weekend, we should start focusing on Ortiz and Brazil. That's a fight that could lead to the mandatory position. So they're really good fights, but we want to make the Chisora fight, but we are running a bit low on time now. Eddie Hearn statements. Okay, so there's certainly a bit to sink our teeth into here, but I'm going to start with the obvious. Do the public want to see a Chisora fight over a Luis Ortiz fight? To me, that is just laughable. But then again, I am in that hardcore group that Hearn is referring to and potentially trying to dismiss as being in the minority view. I'd also contend that many of you that follow this channel also fall into that hardcore camp. Fans who follow boxing closely know who's who, and that the Ortiz fight is a much better and more significant fight than a Derek Chisora rematch. I'd also note an overwhelming number of comments in my last video on Ortiz accepting Whyte's challenge to fight him in the UK wanted the Ortiz fight. It wasn't even close. And I did also launch a poll on Twitter after hearing this news about Eddie Hearn saying that the Chisora fight is what people want to see. And 90% of those that have responded so far, they want the Ortiz fight. And it's not really a big surprise, but my Twitter following, probably like here, is mostly boxing fans who do actually follow the division relatively closely. But as a counterpoint to Hearn's argument that outside of hardcore fans, everyone wants the Chisora fight, my question is, what is that assertion based on? Is it a hunch, or is it a convenient argument to get the Chisora fight made? Keep the money in-house, because after all, it is an in-house fight. It's a pay-per-view event, so Eddie Hearn gets paid twice. All the money stays in-house. My read on this is they'll ultimately make a deal based on who's willing to cut the best deal. And that means take a smaller payday than they want to pay. While Derek Chisora says negotiations haven't started, I don't believe that at all. Some conversations would have been underway before now, especially as Hearn mentioned the Chisora and Whyte rematch weeks ago. And we've seen Chisora, bailing Whyte up, saying he'll pay him £5 million. That was done very publicly. And obviously since then, Whyte's been trolling him on social media about that offer and saying, where's the money, Derek? It's gone deathly silent. So I think Chisora, he's certainly underplaying how advanced negotiations really are, especially given he's saying that they should be wrapped up within a couple of days. And Hearn wants to announce the December event very shortly. All that just doesn't happen in a second. But what I take from Hearn's comments are that if Chisora doesn't agree to his end of the deal, they can just move on to Luis Ortiz or even Dominic Breazeale for a fight. That's a hardball tactic, and he's effectively giving Chisora just days to get on board, or be left behind and get off the bus. And if you're Derek Chisora, what other fights out there are going to give you a payday like a Dillian Whyte pay-per-view event does? None. That's how many. That's the leverage that Hearn and Whyte have over Chisora. And not only that, Whyte can just move on to a just as lucrative fight against Ortiz or Breazeale. Chisora cannot. It's a straight-out power play tactic from Eddie Hearn here. He doesn't want to pay Chisora what Chisora wants. And in my view, it's also designed to send a message to Luis Ortiz and Dominic Breazeale. Look, we've got options. If you're going to negotiate with us for a fight, do not be greedy, because we can make another fight. And whoever negotiates to our terms, they get the fight. This is classic Eddie Hearn. It's how he played off Joseph Parker and Deontay Wilder in 2017. It became a race to the bottom. Had Luis Ortiz not come out so publicly accepting Dillian Whyte's challenge to face him in the UK, because remember, Ortiz was accused of ducking Whyte multiple times, so Ortiz has clapped back and said, look, I'll take you on, I will fight you on that date, December 22nd, send the contract. If he hadn't have done that, we might be looking at the situation quite differently, and Chisora might have actually had more leverage in these negotiations, because it did look, for all money, that Dillian Whyte and Derek Chisora was going to be a lock for December. But Ortiz has sort of inserted himself and said, yeah, okay, I did want to fight you in the States, but I'll come to you. I will fight in the UK. Send me the contract. And Ortiz responding to these Whyte accusations of ducking, wanting to negotiate, it's certainly a fly in the ointment, because it puts pressure on Whyte and Hearn to some degree, especially given Whyte swerved a WBC ordered eliminator against Ortiz this year. And if he went in another direction again, after Ortiz had very publicly called him out and was willing to come to the UK, it would give rise again to claims of ducking. The mentioning of Dominic Breazeale, I think that's more of a red herring. I think it's thrown in there for posterity's sake to widen the potential pool of opponents for Whyte, make it seem like there is more competition for the fight than there potentially really is. I don't think Dominic Breazeale is a serious candidate for that fight. But I would ask, what are we to make of Hearn's tweet saying Ortiz, that fight is 50-50, and then turning around immediately publicly saying the Chisora fight, that's what everyone wants, and that's the one that we want. That's the one we want to make. So how does that make the Ortiz fight 50-50? Doesn't sort of add up, does it? And in some sense, the way whatever fight is marketed and pushed, that's going to win the public over anyway. The mass public that Hearn is talking about, the great unwashed, because repeatedly selling how big and important a fight is. That's what Hearn and Sky will do. They'll go into overdrive once a pay-per-view event is locked in, and they'll just push it out to the public. It'll be all guns blazing because everyone wants to make their money. And with Chisora, the obvious things are, there's a bit of rivalry. It's a bit of a settling the score type fight. Chisora wants revenge. The 2016 fight, ended somewhat controversially. A lot of people, including myself, thought Chisora won. It was also a fight of the year candidate. It did deliver. And the reality is, this is probably the best time to make this fight between Whyte and Chisora. Both are coming off big wins recently. And that will certainly factor heavily into whether this fight gets made or not. But it must be said, casual fans aren't completely stupid. Some are going to see Chisora's record and go, geez, 8 losses. Is this the fight that I want to watch? And it will be a red flag for some. And I'm sure that fact will not be highlighted much, if at all, during a build-up if that fight is made. But similarly, there's a very strong narrative for a Luis Ortiz fight, if not more strong. It's the number 1 in the WBC versus the number 2 in the rankings. Both guys only have 1 loss, which came at the hands of the current respective champions. Luis Ortiz came within a hair of beating Deontay Wilder this year, and Wilder has said if Whyte gets through Ortiz, he will fight Whyte, and that's again been reaffirmed by Wilder, and see this tweet on screen which discusses that. And if that fight is made, all these points I've just mentioned, they would be poured into the hype machine, and it would be sold as the best thing since sliced bread. And I'm not buying the argument that some fans have been making that an Ortiz fight can't be sold to the public. I just don't believe that at all. If they put all their resources into selling that fight, they will sell it. There's a lot on the line for that fight, a lot of prestige. Arguably, it's a much more significant fight for the division than a Chisora rematch, which in reality they could make any time because it's an in-house fight. Maybe they wouldn't make the same money, and I do think that will be a key driver if a Chisora fight is made. And the reality is, for some fans, now that they've had the idea of an Ortiz fight planted in their brain, that's the more attractive option for them. It certainly is for me. That's the fight I would much prefer. And it's not to say that the Chisora and Whyte fight is a bad fight. It's not. It would be a good dust-up. But I would rather see the Ortiz fight. But don't be surprised, depending on how negotiations play out, because Chisora, he just might play hardball. He may not bend to what Eddie Hearn wants him to take in terms of a purse. Don't be surprised if Hearn flip-flops on what he says regarding any of these fighters that have been mentioned. Brazil, Ortiz, Chisora. Ultimately, it's going to come down to how much money they can make, how much they can sort of wind the purse back to. And if they think Chisora is the play provided he's not overpaid, they'll make that fight, if they can make financial sense from it. I'm still hoping, though, that the Ortiz fight gets made, but I'm not holding my breath either. But Eddie, he's certainly given me a good laugh saying that the Ortiz fight is not the one that fans want. What did you make of that? What do you think is coming down the pipe? Is it Chisora, Ortiz, Brazil, something else? What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.